Section 7 of Warriors of Old Japan and Other Stories by Yei Theodora Ozaki. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Dai-san, The Story of Yoshitsune. In old Japan, more than 700 years ago, a fierce war was raging between the two great clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, also called the Heike and the Genji. These two famous clans were always contesting together for political power and military supremacy, and the country was torn in two with the many bitter battles that were fought. Indeed, it may be said that the history of Japan for many years was the history of these two mighty martial families, sometimes the Minamoto and sometimes the Taira gaining the victory, or being beaten, as the case might be. But their swords knew no rest for a period of many years. At last, a strong and valiant general arose in the house of Minamoto. His name was Yoshitomo. At this time, there were two aspirants for the imperial throne, and civil war was raging in the capital. One imperial candidate was supported by the Taira, the other by the Minamoto. Yoshitomo, though a Minamoto, sided at first with the Taira against the reigning emperor, but when he saw how cruel and relentless their chief, Kiyomori, was, he turned against him and called all his followers to rally round the Minamoto standard and fight to put down the Taira. But fate was against the gallant and doughty warrior Yoshitomo, and he suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the Taira. He and his men, while fleeing from the vigilance of their enemies, were overtaken within the city gates and ruthlessly slaughtered by Kiyomori and his soldiers. Yoshitomo left behind him his beautiful young wife, Tokiwa Gozen, and 8 children to mourn his untimely death. 5 of the elder children were by a first wife. The third of these became Yoritomo, the great first shogun of Japan, while the 8th and youngest child was Ushiwaka, about whom this story is written. Ushiwaka and the hero Yoshitsune were one and the same person. Ushiwaka, young ox, he was so called because of his wonderful strength, was his name as a boy, and Yoshitsune was the name he took when he became of age. At the time of his father's death, Ushiwaka was a babe in the arms of his mother, Tokiwa Gozen, but his tender age would not have saved his life had he been found by his father's enemies. After the defeat they had inflicted on the rival clan, the Taira were all-powerful for a time. The Minamoto clan were in dire straits, and in danger of being exterminated now, for so fierce was Kiyomori's hatred against his enemies, that when a Minamoto fell into his cruel hands, he immediately put the captive to death. Realizing the great peril of the situation, Tokiwa Gozen, the widow of Yoshitomo, full of fear and anxiety for the safety of her little ones, quietly hid herself in the country, taking with her Ushiwaka and her 2 other children. So successful was Tokiwa Gozen in concealing her hiding place that, though the Taira clan either killed or banished to a faraway island all the elder sons, relations, and partisans of the Minamoto chief, they could not discover the whereabouts of the mother and her children, notwithstanding the strict search Kiyomori had made. Determined to have his will, and angry at being thwarted by a woman, Kiyomori at last hit on a plan which he felt sure would not fail to draw the wife of Yoshitomo from her hiding place. He gave orders that Sekiya, the mother of the fair Tokiwa, should be seized and brought before him. He told her sternly that if she would reveal her daughter's hiding place, she should be well treated, but if she refused to do as she was told, she would be tortured and put to death. When the old lady declared that she did not know where Tokiwa was, as in truth she did not, Kiyomori thrust her into prison and had her treated cruelly day after day. Now the reason why Kiyomori was so set on finding Tokiwa and her sons was that, while Yoshitomo's heirs lived, he and his family could know no safety, for the strongest moral law in every Japanese heart was the old command: a man may not live under the same heaven with the murderer of his father, and the Japanese warrior recked nothing of life or death, of home or love in obeying this, as he deemed, supreme commandment. Women, too, burned with the same zeal in avenging the wrongs of their fathers and husbands. Tokiwa Gozen, though hiding in the country, heard of what had befallen her mother, and great was her sorrow and distress. She sat down on the mats and moaned aloud. "Is it wrong of me to let my poor innocent mother suffer, to save myself and my children? But if I give myself up, Kiyomori will surely take my lord's sons and kill them. What shall I do? Oh, what shall I do?" Poor Tokiwa! Her heart was torn between her love for her mother and her love for her children. Her anxiety and distraction were pitiful to see. Finally, she decided that it was impossible for her to remain still and silent under the circumstances. She could not endure the thought that her mother was suffering persecution while she had the power of preventing it. So, holding the infant Ushiwaka in her bosom under her kimono, she took his 2 elder brothers, one 7 and the other 5 years of age, by the hand and started for the capital. There were no trains in those days, and all traveling by ordinary people had to be done on foot. Daimyos and great and important personages were carried in palanquins, and they only could travel in comfort and in state. Tokiwa could not hope to meet with kindness or hospitality on the way, for she was a Minamoto, and the Taira being all-powerful, it was death to anyone to harbor a Minamoto fugitive. So, the obstacles that beset Tokiwa were great, but she was a samurai woman, and she quailed not at duty, however hard or stern that duty was. The greater the difficulties, the higher her courage rose to meet them. At last, she set out on her momentous and celebrated journey. It was winter time, and snow lay on the ground, and the wind blew piercingly cold, and the roads were bad. What Tokiwa, a delicately nurtured woman, suffered from cold and fatigue, from loneliness and fear, from anxiety for her little children, from dread lest she should reach the capital too late to save her old mother, who might die under the cruel treatment to which she was being subjected, or be put to death by Kiyomori in his wrath, or finally, lest she herself should be seized by the Taira, and her filial plan be frustrated before she could reach the capital. All this must have been greater than any words can tell. Sometimes, poor, distressed Tokiwa sat down by the wayside to hush the wailing babe she carried in her bosom, or to rest the 2 little boys who, tired and faint and famished, clung to her robes, crying for their usual rice. On and on she went, soothing and consoling them as best she could, till at last she reached Kyoto, weary, footsore, and almost heartbroken, But though she was well nigh overcome with physical exhaustion, yet her purpose never flagged. She went at once to the enemy's camp and asked to be admitted to the presence of General Kiyomori. When she was shown into the dread man's presence, she prostrated herself at his feet and said that she had come to give herself up and to release her mother. "I am Tokiwa, the widow of Yoshitomo. I have come with my 3 children to beseech you to spare my mother's life and to set her free. My poor old mother has done nothing wrong. I am guilty of hiding myself and the little ones, yet I pray humbly for your august forgiveness." She pleaded in such an agonizing way that Kiyomori, the Taira chieftain, was struck with admiration for her filial piety, a virtue more highly esteemed than any other in Japan. He felt sincerely sorry for Tokiwa in her woe, and her beauty and her tears melted his hard heart, and he promised her that if she would become his wife, he would spare not only her mother's life, but her 3 children also. For the sake of saving her children's lives, the sad-hearted woman consented to Kiyomori's proposal. It must have been terrible to her to wed her lord's enemy, the very man who had caused his death, but the thought that by so doing she saved the lives of his sons, who would one day surely arise to avenge their father's cruel death, must have been her consolation and her recompense for the sacrifice. Kiyomori showed himself kinder to Tokiwa than he had ever shown himself to anyone, for he allowed her to keep the babe Ushiwaka by her side. The 2 elder boys he sent to a temple to be trained as acolytes under the tutelage of priests. By placing them out of the world in the seclusion of priesthood, Kiyomori felt that he would have little to fear from them when they attained manhood. How terribly and bitterly he was mistaken, we learn from history, for 2 of Yoshitomo's sons, banished though they had been for years and years, arose like a rushing mighty whirlwind from the obscurity of the monastery to avenge their father, and they wiped the Taira from off the face of the earth. Time passed by, and when the little babe Ushiwaka at last reached the age of 7, Kiyomori likewise took him from his mother and sent him to the priests. The sorrow of Tokiwa, bereft of the last child of her beloved lord Yoshitomo, can better be imagined than described. But in her golden captivity, even Kiyomori had not been able to deprive her of 1 iota of the incomparable power of motherhood, that of influencing the life of her child to the end of his days. As the little fellow had lain in her arms night and day, as she crooned him to sleep and taught him to walk, she forever whispered the name of Minamoto Yoshitomo in his ear. At last, one day her patience was rewarded, and Ushiwaka lisped his father's name correctly. Then Tokiwa clasped him proudly to her breast, and wept tears of thankfulness and joy and of sorrowing remembrance, for she could never, even for a day, banish Yoshitomo from her mind. As Ushiwaka grew older and could understand better what she said, Tokiwa would daily whisper, "Remember thy father, Minamoto Yoshitomo. Grow strong and avenge his death, for he died at the hands of the Taira." And day by day she told him stories of his great and good father, of his martial prowess in battle, and of his great strength and wonderful wielding of the sword, and she bade her little son remember and be like his father, and the mother's words and tears sown in long years of patience and bitter endurance, bore fruit beyond all she had ever hoped or dreamed. So Ushiwaka was taken from his mother at the age of 7 and was sent to the Tokobo monastery at Kurama-yama to be trained as a monk. Even at that early age, he showed great intelligence, read the sacred books with avidity, and surprised the priests by his diligence and quickness of memory. He was naturally a very high-spirited youth, and could brook no control, and hated to yield to others in anything whatsoever. As the years passed by and he grew older, he came to hear from his teachers and school friends of how his father Yoshitomo and his clan the Minamoto had been overthrown by the Taira, and this filled him with such intense sorrow and bitterness that sleeping or waking he could never banish the subject from his mind. As he listened daily to these things, the words of his mother, which she had whispered in his ear as a child, now came throbbing back to his mind, and he understood their full meaning for the first time. In the lonely nights he felt again her hot tears falling on his face, and heard her repeat as clearly as a bell in the silence of the darkness, "Remember thy father, Minamoto Yoshitomo. Avenge his death, for he died at the hands of the Taira." At last one night the lad dreamed that his mother, beautiful and sad as he remembered her in the days of his childhood, came to his bedside and said to him, while the tears streamed down her face, "Avenge thy father, Yoshitomo. Unless thou remember my last words, I cannot rest in my grave. I am dying, Ushiwaka. Remember." And Ushiwaka awoke as he cried aloud in his agony, "I will, honorable mother, I will." From that night his heart burned within him, and the fire and love of clan race stirred his soul. Continual brooding over the wrongs of his clan generated in his heart a fierce desire for revenge, and he finally resolved to abandon the priesthood, become a great general like his father, and punish the Taira. And as his ambition was fired and exalted, and his mind thrilled back to the days when his poor unhappy mother Tokiwa prayed and wept over him, daily whispering in his ear the name of his father, his will grew to purpose strong. Tokiwa had not suffered in vain. From this time on, Ushiwaka bided his time every night, till all in the temple were fast asleep, when he heard the priests snoring, and knew himself safe from observation. He would steal out from the temple, and, making his way down the hillside into the valley, he would draw his wooden sword and practice fencing by himself, and, striking the trees and the stones, imagine that they were his Taira foes. As he worked in this way night after night, he felt his muscles grow strong, and this practice taught him how to wield his sword with skill. One night, as usual, Ushiwaka had gone out to the valley, and was diligently brandishing about his wooden sword. His mind fully bent upon his self-taught lesson, he was marching up and down, chanting snatches of war songs, and striking the trees and the rocks, when suddenly a great cloud spread over the heavens. The rain fell, the thunder roared, and the lightning flashed, and a great noise went through the valley, as if all the trees were being torn up by the roots, and their trunks were splitting. While Ushiwaka wondered what this could mean, a great giant, over 10 feet in height, stood before him. He had large, round, glaring eyes that glinted like metal mirrors. His nose was bright red, and it must have been about a foot long. His hands were like the claws of a bird, and to each there were only 2 fingers. The feathers of long wings at each side peeped from under the creature's robes, and he looked like a gigantic goblin. Fearful indeed was this apparition, but Ushiwaka was a brave and spirited youth, and the son of a soldier, and he was not to be daunted by anything. Without moving a muscle of his face, he gripped his sword more tightly, and simply asked, "Who are you, sirrah?" The goblin laughed aloud and said, "I am the king of the Tengu." Footnote: The Tengu are strange creatures with very long noses. Sometimes they have the head of a hawk and the body of a man. End of footnote. King of the Tengu, the elves of the mountains, and I have made this valley my home for many a long year. I have admired your perseverance in coming to this place night after night for the purpose of practicing fencing all by yourself, and I have come to meet you with the intention of teaching you all I know of the art of the sword." Ushiwaka was delighted when he heard this, for the Tengu have supernatural powers, and fortunate indeed are those whom they favor. He thanked the giant elf and expressed his readiness to begin at once. He then whirled up his sword and began to attack the Tengu, but the elf shifted his position with the quickness of lightning, and taking from his belt a fan made of 7 feathers, parried the showering blows right and left so cleverly that the young knight's interest became thoroughly aroused. Every night he came out for the lesson. He never missed once, summer or winter, and in this way he learned all the secrets of the art which the Tengu could teach him. End of section 7.